The shot came through the break room window at 6:47 in the morning, and the only person who didn't flinch was the new case manager nobody had bothered to learn the name of. She was pouring her second cup of coffee when the glass cracked. Not shattered, just cracked, a single, clean line running diagonal from corner to corner, and she was already moving before the sound registered. Not toward the door, toward the window. She pressed herself flat against the wall beside it, craned her neck just enough to see the parking lot below, and counted. 3 seconds. Then she walked to the break room door, locked it, and turned to face the 4 other people in the room. "Get down," she said. "Away from the windows now." Nobody moved. "Excuse me?" That was Hendricks, Regional Director of Patient Services, visiting from the district office. In his 3rd day of what was supposed to be a 5-day performance audit, he had the kind of face that had never been told no by anyone younger than 50. "Who are you exactly?" She didn't answer him. She was already at the far wall, pulling the cabinet away from the corner with both hands. Her name was Sloan Merritt, and as far as Hendricks or anyone else at Claremont Behavioral Health knew, she had been employed there for exactly 11 days as a provisional case manager. The lowest rung on the administrative ladder, a position that existed mostly to shuffle paperwork between departments and absorb blame when files went missing. She had been hired to fill a gap after the previous case manager resigned mid-quarter. Her desk was in a converted supply closet. Her access badge didn't open the 3rd-floor conference rooms. 2 of the senior clinicians had already submitted informal complaints about her presence in team meetings, calling her disruptive and overstepping, because she had twice pointed out documentation errors that would have cost the clinic its Medicaid reimbursement. She had not argued. She had simply corrected the forms and returned to her supply closet. What none of them knew, what she had not volunteered and no one had thought to ask, was that before Claremont, before the provisional badge and the converted supply closet, Sloan Merritt had spent 8 years as a special agent with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Before that, 2 years embedded with a joint task force tracking domestic extremist networks across 4 states. And before that, 18 months in a program so classified that even her personnel file described it only as federal law enforcement training, specialized. She had left. That part was true and complicated and not relevant right now. Right now she had the cabinet moved and she was crouching beside it, studying the angle of the crack in the window glass. "That was not a stray shot," she said, more to herself than to the room. "Trajectory's wrong for random." "2-level, someone needs to call 911, said Felicia Odom, one of the billing coordinators, who was pressed against the far wall with her phone already out. "Yes," Sloan said. "Do that. Tell them 1 confirmed shot, possibly suppressed." The sound was off, directed at the north-facing break room window, 3rd floor. "Tell them the shooter's likely positioned in the parking structure across Carver Street, middle level, east side. Tell them not to use the main entrance." Felicia stared at her. "Tell them," Sloan said again quietly. Felicia told them. Hendricks was still standing in the center of the room with his arms crossed. He had the particular posture of a man who had attended many crisis management seminars and believed this made him the authority in any crisis. "I need everyone to remain calm," he announced to the room at large. "I've been through active threat training. The protocol is to shelter in place and await law enforcement." "We are sheltering in place," Sloan said, "but you need to get below the window line. If they shift angle, I'm sorry, but I'm going to need you to let me handle this." He straightened his jacket. "What department did you say you were in?" "Case management." "Then this is outside your lane." She looked at him for one long moment. Then she looked away because the window had just moved, not the glass but the light behind it, a shadow crossing the crack, and that meant the shooter was repositioning. "Everyone on the floor," she said, "right now." This time something in her voice made them move. Hendricks did not move. The second shot came 4 seconds later. It hit the window frame 6 inches above where Hendricks's head had been. He dropped. The coffee mug he'd been holding for the past 10 minutes, never once raised to his lips, hit the floor and rolled under the table. Nobody said anything. Sloan was already at the door. "Is there a stairwell that exits to the south side of the building?" "Not the main lobby, service stairs," Felicia said from the floor. "Past the copy room, stay here until police arrive. Keep your heads down and don't use your phones for anything except talking to emergency services." She looked at Hendricks, who was sitting on the floor with his back against the cabinet she had moved, his face the color of old paper. "You okay?" He nodded very slowly. "Good." She unlocked the door and slipped out. The hallway was chaos in the way that office hallways become chaotic. Not explosions and screaming, but doors opening, people leaning out, voices asking what was that? "Did you hear that? Should we be worried?" Someone said there was a noise. Sloan moved through it quickly and quietly, the way she had learned to move through a lot of things, without drawing attention, without announcing herself, without waiting for permission. She had not wanted to come back to this kind of work. That was the truth she carried most days. the one she set down every morning next to her coffee and tried to leave behind. She had a therapist who charged $200 an hour and a lease on an apartment 3 blocks from Claremont that she had chosen specifically because it was boring and small and had a view of a parking garage instead of anything interesting. She had taken the provisional case manager position because it was low stakes and administrative and the kind of thing a person did when they were trying to rebuild a life that looked nothing like the one before. She had not expected Claremont to be a target. In fairness, nobody had. The south stairwell was empty. She took it down 2 floors, came out into a service corridor that ran behind the kitchen, and found the rear exit that opened onto the alley between Claremont and the dry cleaning business next door. She stood in the doorway and assessed. The parking structure across Carver Street was a 6-level municipal garage. From the angle of both shots, the shooter was on level 3 or 4, east side, probably behind one of the concrete support columns. They had used the break room window twice, which meant either they were targeting someone specific in that room, or they were testing response times. Testing response times meant they weren't done. She pulled out her phone and called a number she had not called in 14 months. It rang twice, then, Merritt. The voice on the other end was flat and careful the way voices get when they're surprised, but don't want to show it. I need a name, she said. Claremont Behavioral Health in Millhaven. Has it come up anywhere in the last 6 weeks? Threats, watch list activity, anything tied to the client population. A pause. You're back in the field? I'm a case manager. Has it come up? Another pause, longer. Then give me 4 minutes. She gave him 4 minutes. She spent them watching the east side of the parking structure from the shadow of the doorway, counting the gaps between columns, noting the one that offered the best sightline to the break room window. A red sedan was parked near it. She couldn't see the plates from here. Her phone buzzed. One name, the voice said. Gerald Obie. Former client discharged 6 weeks ago against clinical recommendation, made a verbal threat at discharge that got logged but not escalated. The threat was directed at his former case manager. What was the former case manager's name? Silence. Tell me. Daniel Sutton. He resigned 9 days ago. A beat. The day before you started. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Daniel Sutton had left a position, and nobody had connected his departure to a threat made at discharge. And a week later, they had filled his desk with a provisional employee whose security clearance they had never run and whose background they had never looked at carefully enough to realize she was perhaps overqualified for a supply closet. Is Sutton's home address in the file? She asked. Yes, make sure someone checks on him. And send me Obie's photo. Send it. The photo came through 30 seconds later. She studied it, memorized it, put her phone in her pocket. The police would arrive in, she estimated, another 4 to 6 minutes. They would establish a perimeter which would spook him. A spooked shooter in a concrete parking structure with multiple exit ramps was a problem that could spread across 6 city blocks in under 3 minutes. She did not love this option. She crossed Carver Street. Later, much later, in a conference room at the Millhaven Police Department, with a cup of terrible coffee and a detective named Vasquez, who kept writing things down and then crossing them out, she would have difficulty explaining exactly what she had been thinking. Not because she didn't remember, but because what she had been thinking was very simple and very hard to translate into the kind of language that sounded reasonable in a police report. She had been thinking, he's not going to stop, and nobody else in that building knows what to do with that, and I do. The parking structure smelled like oil and concrete, and the specific cold of underground spaces that never get direct sunlight. She took the vehicle ramp instead of the pedestrian stairs, stayed close to the wall, moved at the pace of someone who belonged there. A woman in business casual clothes returning to her car. Nothing unusual. Level 3 was empty of people. She moved between vehicles, staying low, until she could see the east side. The red sedan was there. The column it was parked behind faced the break room window at the exact angle she had calculated. The man standing behind the column had his back to her. He was watching the building. He was not at this moment holding a weapon. It was on the ground beside him, a rifle with what looked like a suppressor attached, and he was on his phone, and what struck her most was how ordinary he looked. Like someone's father. Like someone who coached youth soccer and had a bumper sticker she hadn't seen yet. He was shaking slightly. His shoulders were up around his ears. She understood suddenly that he had not done this before. That made him more dangerous, not less. Trained people made predictable decisions. Untrained people in crisis made no decisions at all, or all of them at once. She came around the rear of the sedan slowly. Gerald, she said. He spun. His hand went for the rifle. Don't, she said. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just the word, dropped into the space between them like a stone into still water. He stopped. She didn't know why people stopped when she said that word in that tone. She had stopped trying to understand it years ago, and had simply accepted it as something her voice did. Her former supervisor had called it a gift. Her therapist called it a trained response she had internalized to the point of reflex. She called it the only useful thing left over from the work she had tried to leave behind. They let him leave, Gerald said. His voice was shaking worse than his shoulders. Sutton. He was the only one who listened, and they just let him leave, and nobody called me, nobody told me, they just... He stopped. His jaw was working. She's worse, my daughter. She was doing better with Sutton, and now she's worse again, and they just... I know, Sloan said. You don't know, you're right. Not specifically, but I know what it feels like when a system fails someone you love and then acts like it didn't. He looked at her. His hand was still near the rifle, but not on it. What's your daughter's name? Sloan asked, a long pause. Keely? How old? 22? Is she somewhere safe right now? Something shifted in his face. The question had landed somewhere he hadn't expected. She's at home, he said. With her mother, good, Sloan said. That's good. She took one careful step to the side, not toward him, not away, just a shift, removing herself from the direct line between him and the rifle. Gerald, I need you to hear something. Sutton didn't leave because he stopped caring. He left because the clinic was documenting his cases in a way that put his license at risk, and he couldn't fix it from inside. She didn't know this with certainty, but she knew documentation errors that put clinicians at risk, and she knew the kind of quiet, sudden departure that followed them. Whatever happened to Keely, that's not because one person left. That's because the system that was supposed to catch her when people left didn't work. And shooting out windows doesn't fix that system. I know that, he said, and his voice broke on the last word, and his hand dropped away from the rifle entirely. She crossed the remaining distance, picked up the rifle, cleared the chamber in one practiced motion, and set it on the roof of the sedan. Then she stood next to him, not in front of him, not directing him anywhere, just standing there while his breathing slowly, unevenly, came back down to something like normal. I'm going to be arrested, he said. Yes, Keely's going to... I'll make sure someone contacts your wife before this is on the news, and I'm going to give you the name of a public defender who actually returns calls. That's the most I can do. She looked at him. Is it enough to walk out of here? He thought about it. Then he nodded. They walked out together. She kept her hand loosely around his elbow, not restraining, just present. When they came down the vehicle ramp and onto Carver Street, the first patrol car had just pulled up, and two officers stepped out with their hands moving toward their holsters, and Sloan held up her other hand, palm flat. He's unarmed, she said. I've got the weapon secured on level 3. He's going to cooperate. The officers looked at her. He needs medical attention for his hands. He's been gripping that column for over 20 minutes and his circulation is affected. She had noticed him flexing his fingers, the way people did when their hands were going numb. And I need to speak with whoever's running the scene. One of the officers, young, recently out of training, she could tell by the way he was holding himself, said, "Who are you?" She thought about how to answer that. Sloan Merritt, she said. Provisional Case Manager, Claremont Behavioral Health. The officer stared. Behind him, more cars were arriving, and Detective Vasquez was climbing out of an unmarked sedan and already looking at her with the particular expression of someone who has walked into a situation they were not briefed on. Gerald Obie was placed in the back of the patrol car without incident. He did not resist. He did not say anything else. He looked, Sloan thought, like a man who had been holding something so heavy for so long that the act of setting it down had left him temporarily unable to feel his own hands. She understood that, too. The next 3 hours were the conference room and Vasquez's legal pad and the terrible coffee and the question she kept getting asked in different ways. Why had she gone into the parking structure alone? She answered honestly each time. She had calculated the risk. She had assessed his psychological state from the pattern of the shots. She had made a decision. She understood it was not standard protocol. Vasquez finally put his pen down. He was a methodical man, the kind who had probably solved a lot of things by simply refusing to move on until all the pieces were accounted for. Your file, he said, the one Claremont has on you. Provisional Case Manager, she said. Right, he looked at her steadily. Anything else I should know about? She thought about the apartment 3 blocks away with the view of the parking garage. She thought about the therapist and the $200 an hour, and the lease she had signed specifically because it was boring. She thought about 8 years, and a program too classified to name, and a version of herself she had spent 14 months trying to put carefully in a drawer. I'm a good case manager, she said. I catch documentation errors. Vasquez almost smiled. That's not what I asked, I know. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and wrote something she couldn't read upside down and closed the legal pad. She was released at noon. The sun was doing the flat, indifferent thing it did in Millhaven in late October, the kind of light that lit everything without warming anything. She walked back to Claremont. The building was still taped off on the north side, and a cluster of employees stood outside the main entrance in their coats, some on phones, some in the particular stunned quiet of people who had experienced something their brains hadn't finished categorizing yet. Felicia Odom saw her first. "You went into the parking garage," Felicia said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, by yourself." "Yes." Felicia looked at her for a long moment. "The police said he had a rifle." "He did." Felicia pressed her lips together. Then she said very quietly, "Who are you?" Sloan thought about the supply closet, the provisional badge, the two senior clinicians who had submitted complaints about her presence, the access card that didn't open the third-floor conference rooms. "Case manager," she said. "Provisional." She went back inside. Her desk was still there, small and temporary in its converted supply closet, with a stack of files she hadn't finished reviewing, and a coffee cup she had not had time to wash. She sat down. She pulled the first file toward her. She found the documentation error on page 4. She corrected it and moved on to the next one. 2 days later, a letter appeared on her desk. No envelope, no sender, just a folded sheet of paper placed on top of her file sometime before she arrived. It was brief. It acknowledged, in the careful language of institutions that rarely acknowledge anything directly, that her actions on the day in question had contributed to a positive outcome. It noted that her provisional status was under review. It said nothing about what kind of review or in what direction. She read it once, folded it, placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk under the emergency granola bar she'd been saving since her first week. Then she picked up the next file and got back to work.